The wind didn't howl in Wyoming, it screamed. Caleb Ryder had learned that distinction somewhere between his first winter and his second, between hope and whatever this hollow thing inside him had become. The sound came through every crack in the ranch house walls, a relentless banshee wail that made a man question whether he'd actually gone deaf or just stopped caring about noise altogether. He sat at his kitchen table, if you could call it that, more like a plank of scarred pine balanced on two sawhorses, and stared at the ledger in front of him. The numbers hadn't changed in the 3 hours since he'd last looked, but he kept checking anyway, like maybe if he squinted hard enough the mathematics of ruin might rearrange themselves into something survivable. They didn't. 43 head of cattle when he'd started, down to 18 now, and half of those were so thin their ribs showed through mangy hides like piano keys. The banknote was due in 47 days. He had $17 and change. Christ, he muttered, then immediately regretted it. Not because of any religious conviction, he'd lost that somewhere in the frozen mud of his north pasture, but because even his own voice sounded foreign now. How long since he'd spoken to another human being? A week? 2? The isolation was supposed to be temporary. That's what he'd told himself when he'd bought this worthless stretch of land 3 years ago. He'd build it up, prove himself, maybe find a wife once things were established. But the frontier had a way of making fools of men with plans. The lamp on the table flickered, running low on oil. He'd need to refill it soon, but that meant going out to the barn, and going to the barn meant seeing the bodies. 3 more calves had died overnight. He'd counted them this morning when he'd dragged himself out there at dawn, boots crunching through ice-crusted snow, breath-forming clouds that dissipated into nothing, just like everything else. Caleb was 31 years old and felt 60. His hands were cracked and bleeding from the cold, his face weathered to leather, his back a constant complaint of pain from broken sleep on a thin mattress. The mirror above the wash basin showed a stranger, someone gaunt and hollow-eyed, someone who'd stopped bothering to shave a month ago. He closed the ledger with more force than necessary, a small act of defiance against numbers that didn't care. The storm outside intensified. It was Christmas Eve, though he'd only realized that this morning when he'd glanced at the calendar he'd forgotten to update since October. Christmas. What a joke. There'd be no celebration, no visitors, no— 3 sharp knocks rattled the front door. Caleb's head snapped up. For a moment he thought he'd imagined it, the wind playing tricks, exhaustion manifesting sounds. But then it came again. 3 deliberate raps, insistent despite the storm's fury. No one came out here. No one. The nearest neighbor was 5 miles south, and old Morrison wouldn't venture out in weather like this for anything short of a death in the family. The town of Broken Creek was 8 miles northeast, and the folks there had made it clear what they thought of Caleb Ryder, the fool Easterner who'd bought bad land and was slowly starving on it. The knocking came a 3rd time. Caleb stood, chair scraping against floorboards. His hand instinctively went to the rifle propped against the wall near the door. Not because he expected trouble necessarily, but because out here, unexpected meant dangerous more often than not. He grabbed the Winchester, worked the lever to chamber around, and crossed to the door. "Who's there?" he called out, voice rough from disuse. No answer except the wind's shriek. Caleb hesitated, then threw the bolt and yanked the door open. The storm tried to rip it from his hands. Snow and ice blasted into the room, and for a moment all he could see was white chaos. Then his eyes adjusted and he saw her. A woman stood on his porch, or rather, she slumped against the doorframe. Her coat, too thin for this weather, was crusted with ice. Her face was pale, lips tinged blue, dark hair plastered to her skull. She clutched a small leather suitcase in one gloved hand and stared at him with eyes that were struggling to focus. "Caleb Ryder?" Her voice was barely audible over the storm. "Who the hell are—" She swayed, and he dropped the rifle to catch her before she collapsed. The suitcase hit the porch with a thud. She was light, too light, and cold as death itself. "Jesus," Caleb muttered, kicking the door shut behind them and half carrying, half dragging her toward the fireplace. The embers had burned low. He'd been too lost in his ledger to maintain them, but there was still heat. He lowered her into the only decent chair he owned, a battered armchair that had come with the house. Her eyes had closed. "Hey," he said, patting her cheek. "Hey, stay with me. Don't you die in my house. Her eyes fluttered open. I'm Eliza Warren. The name meant nothing to him. You need to get warm. I'm going to... You wrote to me, she said, teeth chattering so hard she could barely form words. 6 months ago, the agency, for a bride. Caleb froze. Oh, Christ, oh no. He'd done that, hadn't he? Written to one of those agencies back east, filled out their forms during a lonely night last spring when desperation and whiskey had combined into catastrophically poor judgment. He'd described the ranch generously in retrospect. He'd listed his prospects, optimistically, to put it mildly. And then he'd waited. One response had come. Some woman from Pennsylvania, interested but cautious. They'd exchanged exactly 3 letters before Caleb had realized what a mistake the whole thing was. He'd never sent the final confirmation, never sent the money for her passage. He'd assumed that was the end of it. I never finalized the arrangement, he said. I know. Eliza's eyes met his, and despite her condition, there was something steel-hard in that gaze. Your last letter made that clear, but I came anyway. You came anyway, Caleb repeated, because it was so absurd he needed to hear it again. You traveled 2,000 miles in winter to marry a man who explicitly told you not to come. I couldn't stay where I was. She coughed, a wet, rattling sound that made Caleb wince. And you described land, space, isolation. That's what I needed. Lady, you're going to die of pneumonia in about 3 hours if we don't... He stopped himself, shifted gears. First things first. Can you stand? We need to get you out of those wet clothes. Her laugh was bitter. How many times you think I've heard that line? I'm trying to save your life, not bed you, Caleb snapped. Though if you want to freeze to death to prove a point, be my guest. I've got enough dead things around here already. Something in her expression shifted. She looked at him properly for the first time, taking in his haggard face, his hollow eyes, the desperation he hadn't bothered to hide. All right, she said quietly. Help me up. He got her standing, guided her toward the bedroom. His bedroom, the only one with a door that closed properly. The bed was unmade, blankets tangled from his restless sleep the night before. I'll get you something dry to wear, he said, moving to the chest at the foot of the bed. It'll be too big, but I brought clothes, Eliza said. She'd followed him, leaning against the doorframe. In my case, on the porch. Right, I'll get it. You start getting those wet things off. He retrieved the suitcase from where he'd dropped it, shook the snow off, and carried it back inside. When he returned to the bedroom, Eliza was struggling with the buttons on her coat, fingers too numb to work properly. Here, Caleb set the case down and crossed to her. Let me. She didn't protest. He worked the buttons free with practiced efficiency. You learned to work with cold fingers when you spent your days outside. The coat came off heavy and sodden. Underneath, her dress was damp but not soaked. I can manage the rest, she said. If you'll just... Right, yeah. Caleb backed toward the door. I'll build up the fire. Get you something hot to drink. He closed the door behind him and stood in the main room, suddenly aware of how his heart was hammering. A woman, here, in his house, on Christmas Eve, in the middle of a killer storm. This was insane. He fed the fire until it roared, filled the kettle with water from the bucket by the door, and set it on the hook above the flames. His mind raced. She couldn't stay. Obviously. Except she couldn't leave either, not in this storm, which meant she was stuck here until the weather broke, which could be days. Days with a stranger. A woman who'd traveled across the country for a marriage proposal he'd abandoned. The bedroom door opened. Eliza emerged wearing a simple gray dress that looked only slightly less damp than what she'd had on before. Her hair hung loose now, dark and wet, framing a face that was still too pale but showed more life than it had minutes ago. Better? Caleb asked. Relatively. She moved toward the fire, held her hands out to the flames. Thank you. For not leaving me on the porch. I'm not that far gone, Caleb said, though even as he spoke he wasn't entirely sure that was true. Water's heating. I've got coffee somewhere, if the mice haven't gotten into it. Coffee would be fine. An awkward silence settled between them, filled only by the fire's crackle and the storm's ongoing assault on the house. So, Caleb said finally. You want to tell me what couldn't stay where I was means? Eliza didn't look at him. Not particularly. Fair enough. You want to tell me why you thought coming here was a better option than literally anywhere else? Also no. Caleb barked a laugh that held no humor. Great, fantastic. So I've got a half-frozen mystery woman in my house on Christmas Eve, and the only thing I know for sure is that she's running from something. Aren't you? Eliza's eyes cut toward him, sharp and assessing. Running from something? I'm not, He stopped, because what was the point in lying? I'm failing. There's a difference. Is there? The kettle began to whistle, saving him from having to answer. He poured water into 2 tin cups, added coffee grounds to steep. The smell filled the room, rich and bitter. It was the first thing that had felt normal in days. He handed her a cup. She wrapped both hands around it, savoring the warmth. Your last letter, she said after a long moment. You said the ranch wasn't working out, that you'd made a mistake coming west, that you couldn't in good conscience bring a woman into a situation that was barely keeping you alive. That's right. And yet you're still here, Caleb shrugged. Too stubborn to quit, too broke to leave. That's pretty much the frontier in a nutshell. Or too stubborn to quit, too proud to admit you need help. He bristled. I didn't ask for... I know you didn't. She sipped her coffee, made a face at the bitterness, but drank anyway. But here I am regardless, so we can spend the next however many days glaring at each other in mutual resentment, or we can make the best of a bad situation. And what exactly would making the best of it look like? Eliza set her cup down on the mantel, turned to face him fully. How many head of cattle do you have left? The question caught him off guard. What? Your herd. How many? 18. Maybe fewer now. I haven't checked since this morning. When did they start dying? About 6 weeks ago, just after the first heavy snow. All at once or gradually? What is this? An interrogation? It's a question. Her voice was patient but firm. Gradually or all at once? Caleb thought back. Gradually. One here, one there at first, then more. Now it's 1 or 2 a day. And before they die, what symptoms? They stop eating, get lethargic. Then they just drop. Eliza nodded slowly, like he'd confirmed something. And your hay? Where do you get it? I buy it from Morrison down the road. Why? Because your cattle aren't dying from the cold, she said. They're being poisoned. Caleb stared at her. What? The hay. Something's wrong with it. Either it was harvested wrong, stored wrong, or it's contaminated with something. I've seen it before. You've seen... How the hell would you know anything about... My father owned a farm in Pennsylvania, Eliza interrupted. Not a big operation, but big enough. I grew up helping with the livestock. Spent more time in this barn than the house, if I'm being honest. Caleb wanted to dismiss it, to write it off as nonsense from a city woman playing at knowledge. But something in her certainty gave him pause. Even if you're right, he said slowly, which I'm not saying you are, what difference does it make? I already bought the hay. It's all I've got to feed them until spring. Then you stop feeding it to them. And let them starve instead? There are other options. Eliza moved past him, scanning the room like she was taking inventory. Do you have a barn, storage? Such as it is. Show me. It's the middle of a blizzard. Then we'll be quick. She was already moving toward the door, grabbing her coat from where he'd hung it near the fire. It was still soaked, but she pulled it on anyway. Caleb watched her, this strange woman who'd appeared out of nowhere with her theories and her certainty, and felt something he hadn't experienced in months. Curiosity, maybe even a flicker of hope, though he knew better than to trust that particular emotion. All right, he said, reaching for his own coat. But if we die of exposure, I'm going to be really pissed. Noted. They stepped out into the storm. The cold hit like a physical blow, stealing breath and thought. Caleb led the way toward the barn, head down against the wind, one hand gripping Eliza's arm to keep her from getting separated. The snow had drifted against the barn door. It took both of them pushing to force it open. Inside was marginally better. No wind, at least, though the cold was just as brutal. The surviving cattle huddled in their stalls, steam rising from their bodies. They looked up with dull eyes as Caleb lit a lantern. Eliza moved among them immediately, running her hands over their flanks, looking in their mouths, checking their eyes. Her movements were practiced, confident. This wasn't a woman pretending to knowledge. She actually knew what she was doing. "This one's close," she said, pausing at a yearling heifer in the corner. "See how she's breathing? Shallow, rapid, and her eyes, the membranes yellow." Caleb looked. She was right, though he'd never have noticed on his own. "The others are in various stages," Eliza continued, moving down the line. "But they're all affected. Where's your hay stored?" He pointed to the loft. She climbed the ladder without hesitation, disappearing into the darkness above. Caleb heard her moving around. Then she reappeared at the ladder's edge. "Come up here." He climbed up. Eliza had pulled apart one of the bales, spreading the hay across the loft floor. Even in the dim light, Caleb could see it, dark patches throughout, a musty smell, something fundamentally wrong. "Mold," Eliza said, "and not just surface mold. This is systemic. It was probably wet when it was baled, never dried properly. Every time your cattle eat this, they're ingesting toxins." Caleb felt something sink in his chest. "Morrison sold me bad hay. Maybe knowingly, maybe not. Doesn't matter now. What matters is stopping it. I told you I don't have any other—" "Yes, you do." Eliza stood, brushing hay from her dress. "How much land do you have?" 400 acres. Most of it's nothing but sagebrush and rocks." "Sagebrush," she nodded. "That'll work. Not ideal, but it'll keep them alive." "You want me to feed my cattle sagebrush?" "I want you to stop feeding them poison. Cattle can survive on range vegetation if they have to. It's not optimal, but it's better than what they're getting now." She started back toward the ladder. "We'll need to clear out this hay tomorrow, every bit of it. Then we start supplementing with what we can gather. In this weather, the storm will break eventually. When it does, we move." Back in the house, shaking snow from their coats, Caleb tried to process what had just happened. This woman, this stranger, had walked into his disaster and immediately started issuing orders like she owned the place. The rational part of his brain said he should resent that. The exhausted part said to shut up and listen. "I don't even know you," he said, hanging his coat by the fire. "You show up half dead on my doorstep, and now you're telling me how to run my ranch?" "I'm telling you how to save your cattle," Eliza corrected. "There's a difference." "And what do you get out of this?" She looked at him for a long moment. "A place to stay, at least until spring." "That's it?" "That's it." Caleb studied her face, trying to read what wasn't being said. She met his gaze steadily, no flinching, no deception that he could detect. "Who are you running from?" he asked quietly. "Someone who doesn't matter anymore." She moved to the fire, held her hands out again. "And if we do this right, someone who'll never find me." "That's not much of an answer. It's the only one you're getting tonight." The storm raged on outside. Inside, the fire crackled, the coffee cooled, and two strangers stood in a failing ranch house trying to decide whether to trust each other with their separate disasters. Finally, Caleb spoke. "You can have the bedroom. I'll sleep out here." "We should take shifts," Eliza said. "Keep the fire going. This house isn't well insulated." "I've been managing." "Barely." She cut him off, but not unkindly. "You look 3 days dead yourself. When's the last time you slept through a night?" He couldn't remember. "Fine," he conceded. "Shifts, you take first. I'll wake you in 4 hours." "All right." She disappeared into the bedroom, closing the door behind her. Caleb stood alone in the main room, listening to the storm, wondering what the hell he'd just agreed to. The next morning dawned clear and brutally cold. The storm had passed, leaving behind a landscape transformed, 3 feet of fresh snow that buried everything, turned the world into an endless white expanse broken only by the dark line of fence posts. Caleb woke to the smell of coffee and something cooking. He sat up on the floor where he'd made his bed, too proud to take the armchair, and found Eliza at the stove working with what little supplies he had. There's no food, he'd told her the night before, and he'd meant it. His stores were down to flour, a little salt pork, and some questionable potatoes. Apparently that was enough for her. She'd made some kind of flatbread and was frying the salt pork with the potatoes. It smelled like heaven. "Morning," she said without turning around. "How'd you sleep?" "Terribly. You?" "About the same." She plated the food, 2 tin plates, roughly equal portions. "But we're alive, so that's something." They ate in silence. The food was simple but good, better than anything Caleb had managed in weeks. When they finished, Eliza stood. "All right, let's get started." "Started with what?" "Clearing the barn. We need that moldy hay out of there before you lose more cattle." "It's Christmas," Caleb said, then immediately felt stupid for pointing it out. Eliza smiled, but there was no humor in it. "So it is. Merry Christmas, Mr. Ryder. Now, let's go save your herd." They worked all day, hauling moldy hay out of the barn, stacking it in a pile away from the buildings to be burned later when the snow melted. It was brutal work in the cold, but Eliza never complained, never slowed. She matched him bale for bale, her breath coming in clouds, her face red from exertion. By late afternoon, the loft was clear. Caleb's back was screaming, his hands were raw, and he was fairly certain he'd pulled something in his shoulder. But looking at the empty space, he felt something he hadn't expected. Relief. "Now what?" he asked. "Now we gather what we can." Eliza pointed toward the open range beyond the barn. "Sagebrush, dried grasses, anything that's not buried under snow. Won't be much, but it'll help." "You're serious about this?" "I'm always serious about livestock, Mr. Ryder. Call me Caleb. If we're going to be working together, might as well drop the formality." "Eliza," she said, "though you knew that already." They gathered what vegetation they could, working until darkness fell. The cattle watched with increasing interest as the smell of the moldy hay faded from the barn. When Eliza finally spread out the gathered vegetation, mixed with the small amount of decent hay Caleb had stored separately, 3 of them actually approached to eat. "That's a good sign," she said. "They're hungry enough to try something new." "Will it be enough?" "For tonight, yes. Tomorrow we'll need to gather more. And we need to think long-term." "Long-term," Caleb laughed, but it was hollow. "I'm 3 days from losing this place to the bank. Long-term is a luxury I don't have." Eliza turned to face him in the dim barn light. "Then we'd better work fast, hadn't we?" That night, eating another simple meal by the fire, Caleb found himself talking. About the ranch, about his failures, about the slowly accumulating weight of disappointment that had brought him to the edge of surrender. He hadn't meant to share any of it, but exhaustion and Eliza's patient silence pulled it out of him. She listened without judgment, asking occasional questions that showed she was actually paying attention. When he finished, she was quiet for a moment. Then, "My father used to say that land doesn't care about your dreams, it only responds to work and adaptation." "That's pretty bleak." "That's farming." She stared into the fire. "But he also said that the people who survive aren't the ones with the best plans. They're the ones who know when to change the plan." Is that what you did? Changed your plan?" Her expression shuddered. "Something like that." "You're not going to tell me, are you? What you're running from?" "Not tonight." "When?" "Maybe never. Does it matter?" Caleb considered. "Probably should, but honestly I'm too tired to care. You work hard. You know your way around livestock, and you haven't tried to kill me yet. That's a better track record than most people I've met out here." Eliza smiled, and this time it reached her eyes. High praise. "Don't let it go to your head." Over the next week they fell into a rhythm, up before dawn, working until exhaustion forced them to stop, falling into bed. Separate beds, Caleb on the floor of the main room, Eliza in the bedroom, and then repeating it all the next day. The cattle slowly improved. Not dramatically, but enough to notice. They moved with more energy, their eyes clearer. 2 of the weakest ones died despite everything, but the losses stopped accelerating. Eliza taught Caleb things he'd never known about livestock management. How to read subtle signs of distress. Which plants were safe for cattle and which weren't. How to make a weak solution of willow bark tea that seemed to help with inflammation. "Where'd you learn that?" he asked when she first showed him. "My mother's mother was Cherokee," Eliza said, crushing willow bark with a rock. "She taught my mother taught me. Most of it got dismissed as superstition, but some of it works." Caleb learned not to ask too many questions about her past. She'd share small things, like her grandmother's remedies or her father's sayings, but anything more personal got shut down immediately. There was a wall there, high and solid, and she had no intention of letting him past it. He respected that, mostly because he had his own walls, his own things he didn't want to discuss. They were two damaged people trying to survive, nothing more. Except it was becoming something more, whether either of them wanted to admit it. It wasn't romance, Caleb was too exhausted, and she was too guarded for that. But it was partnership, trust being built through shared labor, through quiet mornings drinking coffee before the sun rose, through evenings by the fire where they were too tired for anything but honesty. 8 days after her arrival, they made their first trip into Broken Creek together. Caleb needed supplies. What little money he had wouldn't go far, but it would get basics. Eliza had insisted on coming, though he'd warned her the town wouldn't be friendly. "I've dealt with unfriendly before," she'd said. They took his wagon, the one remaining horse pulling it through snow-packed roads. The journey took most of the morning. Broken Creek wasn't much. A main street with a general store, a saloon, a church, and a handful of houses huddled together against the wind like they were ashamed to be there. Morrison's general store occupied the prime spot on Main Street. A hand-painted sign over the door advertised dry goods, feed, and supplies. Morrison himself stood behind the counter, a heavy-set man with suspicious eyes and a talent for finding ways to add extra charges to every bill. He looked up when Caleb and Eliza entered, his expression shifting from boredom to surprise to something harder. "Ryder," he said, "didn't expect to see you before spring. Figured you'd froze out there." "Not yet," Caleb said evenly. "Need some supplies." Morrison's eyes slid to Eliza, taking in her presence with obvious speculation. "And who's this?" "Eliza Warren," she said before Caleb could answer. "I'm his mail-order bride," Morrison finished, and the way he said it made it sound like an insult. "Heard about that. Whole town did. Made for some entertaining conversation." Caleb felt heat rise in his face, but Eliza just smiled pleasantly. "I'm glad we could provide entertainment. Now we need flour, salt, and some decent hay if you have any." "Hay?" Morrison's expression sharpened. "What's wrong with what I sold you before?" "It was moldy," Eliza said simply. "Poisoned half his herd." The store went very quiet. Morrison's face flushed red. "You calling me a cheat?" "I'm stating a fact," Eliza said, voice still pleasant. "The hay was compromised. Whether you knew that when you sold it or not isn't my concern. But we won't be buying from that batch again." "You got some nerve, lady, coming into my store and—" "Do you have decent hay or not?" Caleb interrupted. He could feel the situation escalating and wanted no part of it. "Because if you don't, we'll find someone who does." Morrison glared at both of them, clearly weighing his pride against profit. Finally, "Got some in the back. Good quality. Properly stored. Cost you, though." "How much?" The price Morrison quoted was double what it should have been. Caleb started to argue, but Eliza put a hand on his arm. "That's fine," she said. "We'll take 20 bales." 20. Caleb turned to her. "I can't afford—" "Yes, you can." Her eyes met his, steady and sure. "Trust me." He wanted to argue. The numbers didn't work, not even close. But something in her certainty made him nod. They loaded the wagon in tense silence, Morrison watching from the store entrance. As they finished, a woman approached, Mrs. Patterson, whose husband owned the saloon. "Excuse me," she said, addressing Eliza. "I couldn't help overhearing. You said you fixed his cattle." "They're improving," Eliza said carefully. "Why?" "My husband's got a milk cow that's been sick. Stopped giving milk a week ago. I don't suppose—" "I could take a look," Eliza said. "No promises, but I'll try." Mrs. Patterson's relief was visible. "Thank you, really. If you could just—" "The barn's behind the saloon." Caleb watched as Eliza followed Mrs. Patterson, leaving him alone with Morrison and growing curiosity from other townspeople who'd noticed the exchange. 20 minutes later, Eliza returned. "The cow needs better ventilation and a change in feed. I gave her some recommendations, should see improvement in a few days." "Just like that?" Mrs. Patterson's expression was somewhere between hope and disbelief. "How much do I owe you?" "Nothing," Eliza said. "Just, if it works, tell people." On the ride home, Caleb finally asked the question that had been burning in his mind. What was that about? Tell people? You need reputation, Eliza said simply. Right now, you're the failing Easterner. But if I can help with livestock problems, and I can, then you become the man with the wife who knows animals. People will come to you, they'll ask for help, and maybe, eventually, they'll stop seeing you as a failure. That's your plan? Fix the town's livestock. That's part of it. The other part is making this ranch actually functional, which means we need to talk about spring. Spring's 3 months away. Exactly. Which means we have 3 months to prepare. She started laying out ideas, not asking, just stating facts and strategies. They needed to improve the pastures, fix the fences, maybe acquire some chickens for eggs and meat. They needed to think about diversifying, not just cattle, but maybe pigs, definitely a vegetable garden once the ground thawed. Caleb listened, torn between hope and skepticism. Everything she described required work, required resources, required time he wasn't sure he had. And the banknote? He asked. How does any of this help with that? It doesn't, Eliza admitted. Not directly. But if we can show them the ranch is recovering, that you're implementing real improvements, maybe they'll extend the deadline. Banks don't care about maybes. Then we make them care. Her confidence should have been infuriating. Instead, it was almost contagious. Almost. That night, while Eliza slept, Caleb sat by the fire and did the math again. The hay they'd bought would help, but it hadn't been free. His reserves were now down to $11. The banknote was due in 39 days. Even if everything Eliza proposed worked perfectly, and nothing ever worked perfectly, they wouldn't make it. He should tell her, should explain that her plans, however good, were building on a foundation that was about to collapse. But when morning came and she woke with new ideas, new energy, new determination, he stayed silent. Maybe he was a coward, or maybe he just couldn't bring himself to extinguish the first real hope he'd felt in months. The weather held cold but clear. They worked through late December and into January, making visible progress. The cattle continued to improve. Word spread about Mrs. Patterson's milk cow recovering, and 2 other families came asking for Eliza's help with their livestock. She charged them, despite Caleb's surprise. Nothing big, she'd explained, just enough to show it's a service worth something. The money helped. Not enough to solve their problems, but enough to buy time. But time was running out, and they both knew it. The banknote hung over everything, an approaching deadline that no amount of hard work could fully address. One evening in mid-January, 3 weeks before the payment was due, Caleb finally told her the truth. "We're not going to make it," he said. "Even with everything we've done, the money's not there." Eliza was quiet for a long moment. Then, "How short are we?" $300. Might as well be $3,000. "And if you default?" "The bank takes the ranch. I lose everything." "Where would you go?" It was a fair question. "I don't know. East, maybe. Find work somewhere. Start over." "And me?" He met her eyes. "That's up to you. Our arrangement, if you can even call it that, ends when this place does." "But sit." She stood, moved to the window, stared out at the snow-covered land. There might be another option. Like what? "You could sell some of the herd, get enough to cover the note. Those cattle are the only way this ranch makes money. Sell them, and even if I keep the land, I've got no way to make it productive." "Then we find another buyer, someone who needs land, who might be willing to partner." "No one wants this land, Eliza. That's why I got it cheap in the first place." "Then what do you want to do?" The question hung in the air. What did he want? A month ago, the answer would have been simple. Give up, walk away, accept failure. But now, with the ranch starting to show life, with proof that maybe, just maybe, it could work. "I want to fight," he said quietly, "but I don't know how." Eliza turned from the window. "Then we figure it out. Together." And in that moment, standing in a failing ranch house in the middle of nowhere, Caleb realized something that should have terrified him, but somehow didn't. He believed her. The question was whether belief would be enough when the bank came calling. The answer came from an unexpected direction 3 days later, delivered by a stranger on a mud-splattered horse who looked like he'd ridden through hell to get there. Caleb was in the barn, checking on a heifer that had been limping, when he heard the horse approach. He stepped outside to find a young man dismounting. Couldn't have been more than 25, with nervous eyes and clothes that marked him as townfolk, not ranch stock. You Caleb Ryder? The man asked. Depends on who's asking. Name's Thomas Webb. I work at the bank in Broken Creek. He pulled an envelope from his coat. Mr. Hendricks sent me with this. Caleb's stomach dropped. The bank. 3 weeks early. That couldn't mean anything good. He took the envelope, broke the seal, and read. The words blurred together at first, panic making it hard to focus, but gradually the message clarified. It wasn't a foreclosure notice. It was worse. It was an invitation. He wants to see me, Caleb said, looking up at Webb. Why? Don't know, sir. He just said to deliver this and wait for your response. Tell him I'll be there tomorrow. Webb nodded, clearly relieved his task was done, and rode off without another word. Caleb stood holding the letter, reading it again to make sure he hadn't misunderstood. Samuel Hendricks, president of Broken Creek Bank and Trust, requested Caleb's presence at his earliest convenience to discuss matters pertaining to your outstanding obligations. Eliza found him still standing there 10 minutes later. What's wrong? She asked, reading his expression. He handed her the letter. She scanned it quickly, her face revealing nothing. Could be good news, she said. You don't believe that any more than I do. No, she admitted, but sitting here worrying won't change what he wants. We go tomorrow, we find out, and we deal with whatever it is. We? You think I'm letting you face a banker alone? You'll agree to something terrible just to avoid confrontation. She wasn't wrong. Caleb had never been good with authority, with men in suits who held power over his future. He either got angry and defensive or rolled over completely. Neither approach had served him well. All right, he said. We'll go together. They left before dawn the next morning, taking the wagon even though riding would have been faster. Caleb told himself it was practical. They could pick up supplies on the way back, but really he just wanted the extra time to prepare himself for whatever was coming. The road was easier than it had been 2 weeks ago. The snow had packed down, frozen hard enough to support the wagon's weight. Still, it took them 3 hours to reach Broken Creek, arriving just before noon. The bank occupied a brick building that stood out among the town's mostly wooden structures. 2 stories with real glass windows and a painted sign that looked professionally done. Hendricks had built it 5 years ago when Broken Creek was supposed to become a major rail hub. That hadn't happened. The railroad had gone south instead, but the bank remained, a monument to optimism that hadn't panned out. Kind of like Caleb's ranch, he thought darkly. They tied up the horse and entered through the heavy oak door. Inside was warmer than Caleb expected, heated by a pot-bellied stove in the corner. A clerk sat at a desk near the front, scratching figures in a ledger. Help you? He asked without looking up. Caleb Ryder, here to see Mr. Hendricks. That got the clerk's attention. He looked up, eyes widening slightly. Whether from recognition or surprise, Caleb couldn't tell. One moment. The clerk disappeared through a door at the back, returning 30 seconds later. He'll see you now, both of you. Hendricks' office was smaller than Caleb expected, but well appointed. A desk that looked like it had been shipped from back east, leather chairs that actually matched, and a painting on the wall that depicted some pastoral scene that bore no resemblance to Wyoming whatsoever. Hendricks himself was in his 50s, gray-haired and solid in the way of men who'd spent years building something substantial. He rose when they entered, extending a hand. Mr. Ryder, thank you for coming. He turned to Eliza. And you must be Mrs. Ryder? Warren, Eliza corrected. We're not married. Hendricks' eyebrows rose fractionally, but he covered it well. My apologies. Please, sit. They sat. Caleb's hands were sweating despite the cold. He clasped them together to keep them still. I'll get right to the point, Hendricks said, settling back into his chair. Your note comes due in 19 days. I've reviewed your account, and unless something has changed dramatically, you're not in a position to pay. No, sir, Caleb said. I'm not. I expected as much. Which brings me to why I asked you here. Hendricks pulled a folder from his desk drawer, opened it. I've had an inquiry about your property. Caleb's breath caught. An inquiry? From a gentleman named Marcus Davison. Perhaps you've heard of him? The name meant nothing to Caleb, but beside him, Eliza had gone very still. Can't say I have, Caleb said carefully. He's a land speculator out of Denver, buys up failing properties, consolidates them, resells to larger operations. He's been working his way through this territory for the past year. Hendricks leaned forward. He's offering $800 for your land. $800. More than enough to pay the note and have money left over. Caleb should have felt relief. Instead, all he felt was hollow. What's the catch? He asked. No catch. He pays cash, you sign over the deed, everyone walks away clean. And I lose the ranch. You were going to lose it anyway, Hendricks said, not unkindly. This way, at least you get something. You could start over somewhere else, buy cheaper land, make better choices. Or, Eliza spoke for the first time, her voice tight, he could keep his land and pay you what he owes. Hendricks turned his attention to her. And how exactly would he do that, Miss Warren? Do you have $300 hidden somewhere? No, but we have a functioning ranch that's showing improvement. Surely that counts for something. It counts for very little if he defaults. Then I'm left holding worthless land that I can't sell. It's not worthless, Eliza said. It's undervalued. There's a difference. The market determines value, Miss Warren. And right now the market says Mr. Ryder's ranch isn't worth what he paid for it. Because the market doesn't know what we've done there in the last month, Eliza shot back. The market doesn't know that the cattle are recovering, that we've identified and solved the problems that were killing them. The market doesn't know that we're implementing sustainable practices that will make that land productive for years to come. Hendricks looked at her with new interest. You seem very invested in this outcome. I am. Why? If you'll forgive my bluntness, you're not married to Mr. Ryder. You have no legal claim to the property. If he sells, you walk away with nothing either way. Eliza's jaw tightened, but she didn't back down. Because I've put work into that ranch, because I've seen what it can become, and because walking away from something the moment it gets difficult is a coward's choice. The office went quiet. Hendricks studied Eliza for a long moment, then turned back to Caleb. Is she always like this? Pretty much, Caleb said. Interesting. Hendricks closed the folder. All right, here's what I'm willing to do. I'll give you until the original due date, 19 days, to come up with the full amount. If you can't, I accept Davison's offer and you're out. But if you somehow manage to pay, I'll extend your next note at a reduced interest rate. Call it a reward for determination. And if I need more time? Caleb asked. You don't get it. 19 days, Mr. Ryder, that's what you have. They left the bank in tense silence, climbed back onto the wagon, and started the journey home. Half a mile outside town, Eliza finally spoke. Marcus Davison is the man I'm running from. Caleb's hands tightened on the reins. What? The land speculator. He's not just buying property, he's buying me. I don't understand. Eliza stared straight ahead, her voice flat with forced calm. I worked for his family as a companion to his mother. She was ill, needed someone with medical knowledge. I was qualified. I needed work. It seemed like a fair arrangement. And Marcus decided I was part of the household assets, made his intentions clear. When I refused, he made it equally clear that refusal wasn't an option. Caleb felt something cold settle in his chest. He hurt you? He tried. I left before he could finish what he started. She turned to look at Caleb for the first time since they'd left town. I took money from the household accounts when I ran. Not much, but enough that he could claim theft if he wanted. Which means, if he finds me, he can have me arrested or simply take me back. Either way, I'm trapped. That's why you came here, to a failing ranch in the middle of nowhere. I needed somewhere he wouldn't think to look, somewhere so unremarkable that even if he learned about the mail order arrangement, he'd assume I'd never actually go through with it. She laughed, bitter. And I was right. Until now. The offer on the ranch, Caleb said slowly, working it through. It's not about the land at all. It's about flushing me out. If you sell, I have to surface, have to go somewhere else, and he'll be watching for that. Eliza's hands clenched in her lap. But if you refuse the offer, if you somehow manage to pay the note, then there's no transaction, no reason for him to come here personally. The land stays yours, I stay hidden, and eventually he moves on to easier prey. That's a lot of assumptions. I know. Caleb drove in silence for a while, processing. Finally, you could have told me this before. Would it have changed anything? Probably not. But I deserve to know what I was getting into. You're right. I'm sorry. They didn't speak again until they reached the ranch. By then, the sun was setting, painting the snow in shades of orange and gold that would have been beautiful if Caleb had been in any state to appreciate it. He unhitched the horse, got her settled in the barn with feed and water. When he came back to the house, Eliza had started a fire but hadn't bothered with food. She sat in the armchair, staring at nothing. "So," Caleb said, dropping into the chair opposite, "we need $300 in 19 days. "I have 47, Eliza said, "saved from the jobs I've done in town." "I have 11. That leaves us 242 short. The cattle. If we sold them, we'd get maybe 150, and that's if we found a buyer quickly, which we won't because everyone knows we're desperate." Caleb rubbed his face. "And even if we did, we'd have no herd left. No way to make the ranch profitable. Then we need another option. I'm open to suggestions." Eliza was quiet for a long time. When she finally spoke, her voice was careful. "What if we gave people a reason to invest?" "Invest in what? A failing ranch?" "Invest in expertise. In what I can do." She leaned forward. "The town's seen results. Mrs. Patterson's cow recovered. The Miller family's goats stopped having stillbirths after I adjusted their feed. Even Morrison admitted our cattle look better than they did a month ago." So? "So we formalize it. We offer consulting services, livestock health assessments, feed recommendations, basic veterinary care. We charge for it. Not much, but enough. And we get paid up front." Caleb considered it. "That might get us $50, maybe $75 if we're lucky. We'd still be way short. Then we combine it with something else. What else can we offer that people need?" "I don't know. I'm a failed rancher, Eliza, not a—" "You're a man who survived 2 brutal winters on land everyone said was worthless. That takes skill. Knowledge." She was getting animated now, the way she did when she was working through a problem. "What do you know that other ranchers don't?" "Nothing. That's why I failed." "Stop." Her voice was sharp. "I'm serious. What did you have to learn to survive out here?" Caleb thought about it. "Water management, I guess. This land doesn't hold water well. I had to figure out where to dig, how to direct runoff from the snow. And fencing, the ground freezes so hard you can't set posts properly half the year. Had to develop a technique that works." "There. That's valuable. How many ranchers struggle with the same problems?" "Most of them, but nothing. You know how to solve those problems. That's worth money to people who don't." "You want me to teach ranching techniques? I barely know what I'm doing." "You know more than you think, and what you don't know you've learned through failure. That's the most valuable kind of knowledge." Eliza stood, pacing now. "We put out word that we're offering services. Livestock consulting from me, land management consulting from you. We target the newer ranchers, the ones still figuring things out. We offer it as a package deal. Assess your operation, identify problems, provide solutions. Charge $100 per assessment. No one's going to pay $100 for ye. They will if it saves them from losing everything, which it will." She stopped, faced him. "It's not enough to cover the full note, but combined with what we have saved, plus what we can make from selling a few cattle, just a few, not the whole herd, it might get us close. And if it doesn't? Then we lose the ranch, and I run again. But at least we'll have tried something other than just waiting to fail." Caleb looked at her. This woman who'd appeared in a storm and refused to give up, who'd worked herself to exhaustion for a place that wasn't even hers, who was now proposing a plan so audacious it might actually work or might blow up spectacularly in their faces. "All right," he said, "let's do it." The next morning, they rode back into Broken Creek with a handwritten advertisement Eliza had composed by lamplight the night before. It promised professional ranch consultation, livestock health and land management, limited availability. Morrison refused to post it in his store. "I'm not helping you take business from people," he said flatly. But Mrs. Patterson agreed to put one in the saloon window, and the church allowed them to tack one to their community board. By noon, word had spread enough that people were talking. Not all of it was positive. "Who does she think she is?" Caleb overheard one rancher mutter. Some mail-order woman playing expert. And him offering advice? Ryder couldn't manage his own place. Now he wants to tell us how to run ours? But there were other voices too, quieter ones. My sister's cow did get better after Mrs. Warren looked at it. Heard he's got his herd back from near death. That's got to count for something. They returned to the ranch that afternoon with zero commitments and a lot of skepticism to overcome. Caleb felt the familiar weight of doubt settling back over him. Maybe this was stupid, he said as they unhitched the horse. Maybe we're just making fools of ourselves. Maybe, Eliza agreed, but we're making fools of ourselves while trying. That's better than making fools of ourselves while doing nothing. 2 days later, their first client arrived. His name was Robert Chen, and he'd bought land 5 miles west 6 months ago. He was around Caleb's age, with a quiet intensity and the look of someone who was hanging on by his fingernails. I heard what you're offering, he said, standing in Caleb's doorway. I want to know if it's real or if you're running some kind of scheme. It's real, Caleb said. No guarantees, but we'll give you honest assessment and practical advice. And if I don't like what I hear, then you don't pay. We'll put that in writing if you want. Chen considered this, then nodded. All right. When can you come look? They went that afternoon, riding to Chen's property with a notebook and determined expressions. What they found was worse than Caleb's situation had been: poorly placed buildings, inadequate drainage, cattle that were barely clinging to life. Eliza spent 2 hours examining the livestock while Caleb walked the property with Chen, pointing out problems and potential solutions. The drainage issue was fixable. The building placement was permanent, but there were ways to work around it. Your biggest problem, Caleb told him, is that you're trying to run this place like it's back east. Everything's designed for regular rainfall and mild winters. Out here, you need to think differently. He explained water management, showed Chen where to dig catchment areas, how to modify his barn for better ventilation in winter. Basic things that Caleb had learned through trial and error. When Eliza finished her livestock assessment, the picture was grim but not hopeless. Half your herd has respiratory issues from poor ventilation, she told Chen. The other half is malnourished. Your feed ratio is wrong. You're giving them too much grain, not enough roughage. Their digestive systems can't handle it. Can it be fixed? Yes, but you need to act now. Another month and you'll start losing them. She laid out a plan. Different feed ratios, modifications to the barn, specific herbs to help with the respiratory problems. It was detailed, specific, and clearly drew from real expertise. Chen listened to everything, asked good questions, and at the end pulled out a leather wallet. You said $100? That's right. He counted out the bills slowly, like parting with them physically hurt. I'm trusting you both. If this doesn't work, it'll work, Eliza said. Follow the plan, and you'll see improvement in 2 weeks. They rode home as the sun set, $100 richer and tentatively hopeful. One down, Caleb said. 242 to go, Eliza replied. Word of Chen's consultation spread. 3 days later, another rancher showed up. Then 2 more the day after that. Some were skeptical, some were desperate. All of them were willing to pay for expertise they couldn't find elsewhere. Caleb found himself explaining the same concepts over and over: water management, winter preparation, how to read the land. Things he'd learned through failure, now repackaged as knowledge. It felt strange, almost fraudulent at first. Who was he to give advice? But the clients kept coming back with reports of improvement: cattle gaining weight, water sources that didn't freeze over, small victories that added up. Eliza was in her element. Every consultation revealed how much she actually knew, how much experience lay beneath her quiet exterior. She diagnosed problems with confidence, offered solutions that worked, and slowly built a reputation that extended beyond Broken Creek into the surrounding ranches. The money accumulated. 150, 200, 230. With 11 days left, they were still $72 short. Caleb sold 4 of his weakest cattle to a passing buyer, getting $30 for the lot. Highway robbery, but he didn't have time to negotiate. That left them 42 short. We're not going to make it, he said one night, doing the math for the 100th time. We're close, but not close enough. We have 11 days, Eliza said. A lot can happen. Or nothing can happen, and we lose anyway. She didn't argue. They both knew the reality. The next morning brought unexpected salvation in the form of a wealthy rancher named Augustus Blake. He owned the largest spread in the territory, thousands of acres north of Broken Creek. Caleb had never met him. Men like Blake didn't associate with men like Caleb. But Blake showed up at the ranch in a polished wagon, dressed like he was heading to a business meeting in Denver, and made his proposition clear. "I've heard about your consulting services," he said without preamble. "I want to hire you, both of you. I've got a problem with my prize breeding stock, and my regular veterinarian is stumped." "We're not veterinarians," Eliza said carefully. "We don't claim to be." "But you know animals, and you've got results. That's what I need." Blake leaned forward. "I'll pay $300 if you can solve my problem." Caleb and Eliza exchanged glances. $300. Exactly what they needed. "What's the problem?" Eliza asked. "My imported breeding bulls. I paid a fortune for them. They're supposed to improve my herd genetics, but they've all developed lameness in their front legs. Can't even mount the cows properly. If I can't breed them, they're worthless." "When did it start?" "About 2 months ago. All 3 bulls, same symptoms, progressive deterioration." Eliza thought for a moment. "We'll need to examine them. No promises, but we'll try." "Good enough. When can you come?" "Tomorrow morning." Blake nodded and left, his wagon disappearing down the road in a cloud of dust. The moment he was gone, Caleb turned to Eliza. "Can you actually fix this?" "I don't know, but $300 says I'm going to try damn hard." They arrived at Blake's ranch at dawn the next day. The property was massive, well-maintained buildings, organized pastures, everything Caleb's ranch should have been. The contrast was depressing. Blake led them to a separate paddock where 3 enormous bulls stood, each one worth more than Caleb's entire herd. They were impressive animals, perfect conformation, excellent genetics, but all 3 moved with an obvious limp. Eliza spent an hour examining them. She checked their hooves, felt their legs, watched how they moved, asked detailed questions about their diet and living conditions. "It's not injury," she said finally, "and it's not infection. The hooves are perfect. No abscesses or damage." "Then what is it?" Blake demanded. "I need to see where they're kept at night." Blake led them to a brand new barn, state-of-the-art construction with proper ventilation and spacious stalls. The floor was covered in fresh straw, everything clean and well-maintained, too well-maintained. Eliza knelt, pushed aside the straw, examined the floor underneath. It was smooth concrete, perfectly level, exactly what a modern barn should have. "There's your problem," she said, standing. "What? The floor?" "The floor. Concrete is too hard for these animals. They're heavy bulls spending all night standing on an unyielding surface. It's causing inflammation in their joints, particularly the front legs, which bear more weight. The lameness isn't a disease, it's mechanical stress." Blake stared at her. "You're saying my brand new barn is crippling my bulls?" "I'm saying the floor is wrong for animals this size. They need something with give, dirt, deep bedding, rubber mats, something that cushions their weight." "That's the stupidest thing I've ever heard." Eliza's expression didn't change. "Then don't pay us. But if you want them to recover, you need to change where they're housed." Blake looked at Caleb. "You believe this?" Caleb thought about it. He'd spent enough time with Eliza now to know when she was guessing versus when she was certain. This was certainty. "Yes," he said, "I do." Blake stood silent for a long moment, clearly torn between pride and pragmatism. Finally, "What do you recommend?" "Move them to a different structure, one with dirt floors and deep straw bedding. Keep them there for 2 weeks. Add willow bark to their feed to help with inflammation. If I'm right, you'll see improvement in 5 days. And if you're wrong, then you're out $300 and some pride. But your bulls are still lame." Blake's jaw tightened. "Fine, but I'm not paying until I see results." They rode home in uncertain silence. Either Eliza was right, and they'd just saved themselves, or she was wrong, and they'd lost their last chance at keeping the ranch. 5 days passed. Each one felt like a year. Caleb tried to work, tried to focus on normal ranch tasks, but his mind kept circling back to Blake's bulls, and the banknote now just 6 days away. On the morning of the 6th day, Blake arrived at their ranch personally. Caleb's heart sank when he saw the rancher's expression, stern and unreadable. "They're walking," Blake said without greeting. "What?" "My bulls. They're walking normally. The lameness is 90% gone." He pulled an envelope from his coat and handed it to Eliza. $300, as agreed. "I don't know how you knew, but you were right." Eliza took the envelope with steady hands. "Thank you." Blake studied them both for a moment. "You're wasted out here, you know. Both of you. You could make real money if you set up properly in town." "We like it out here," Caleb said. "Suit yourself." Blake tipped his hat and left. The moment he was gone, Caleb let out a breath he didn't realize he'd been holding. "We did it. We did it," Eliza echoed. And for the first time since he'd met her, she smiled, really smiled, without reservation or guard. They paid the banknote the next day with $27 to spare. Hendricks accepted the payment with visible surprise and reluctant respect. "I'll admit," he said, counting the bills, "I didn't think you'd make it." "Neither did we," Caleb said honestly. "And Davison's offer?" "Tell him the land's not for sale." Hendricks nodded slowly. "He's not going to like that." "I don't particularly care what he likes." They left the bank with the paid note in hand and a weight lifted that Caleb hadn't fully realized he'd been carrying. The ranch was his, really his, for another year at least. On the ride home, Eliza was quiet. Not the tense quiet of worry, but something else. Contemplative, maybe. "You all right?" Caleb asked. "Blake was right," she said, "about us being wasted out here. We could make more money in town building a real practice." But I don't want to. The town means visibility. Visibility means risk, and I'm not ready for that yet." "So you're staying?" She turned to look at him. "If you'll have me. We never did finalize any kind of arrangement. I just showed up and started working." Caleb considered how to answer. A month ago, he'd been alone and failing. Now he had a partner, not romantic, not exactly friendly, but something solid and functional that worked. 50-50 split on consulting income, Shimtu, he said. "You handle livestock, I handle land management, room and board covered, and when we rebuild the herd to profitable numbers, you get a percentage of cattle sales. That's generous. It's fair. You've earned it." Eliza nodded slowly. "All right. Partners, then?" "Partners." They shook on it, formal and businesslike, and headed home to a ranch that, against all odds and expectations, had survived. The partnership worked better than either of them expected, which meant it worked imperfectly, but functionally, like most things that survived in Wyoming. February brought a false spring, temperatures climbing just high enough to turn the top layer of snow into slush before refreezing each night into treacherous ice. Caleb spent those weeks repairing fences that had sagged under winter's weight, while Eliza divided her time between their own recovering herd and consultation calls that came with increasing frequency. They'd developed a rhythm. Up before dawn, coffee and silence while the world was still dark, then splitting off to their separate tasks until evening brought them back together for whatever meal they could cobble together from diminishing supplies. The conversations were practical, what needed doing, who was coming tomorrow, whether the north pasture drainage was holding. It should have felt sterile, this business arrangement dressed up as cohabitation. Instead, it felt like the only honest relationship Caleb had ever had. No pretense, no performance, just two people working toward survival with clear eyes and calloused hands. The trouble started on a Tuesday in late February, delivered by Morrison's eldest son on a horse that had clearly been ridden hard. "Pa says there's men in town asking about you," the boy gasped, barely off his mount. "About Miss Warren specifically. Says they're not local and they're carrying enough money to make people talk." Eliza had been in the barn, treating a cow with mastitis. She emerged at the commotion, took one look at the boy's expression, and went very still. "How many men?" she asked, her voice level. "3. Maybe 4. They showed up yesterday, been staying at the boarding house. Asking questions real polite like, but Pa says it feels wrong." "Did they give names?" "One calls himself Mr. Davison. The others don't say much." Caleb saw Eliza's face drain of color. She recovered quickly, but not quickly enough. "Tell your father thank you," she said to the boy. And tell him we appreciate the warning." The kid nodded and rode off. Eliza stood watching him go, her hands clenched at her sides. "So he came," Caleb said quietly. "He came." "What do you want to do?" Eliza turned to face him, and for the first time since Christmas Eve, she looked genuinely afraid. "I don't know. If he's asking questions, it's only a matter of time before someone mentions the ranch. And if he comes here, then we deal with it." "You don't understand. Marcus he doesn't just give up. If he's here personally, it means he's decided I'm worth the effort to retrieve. And he has resources, money, connections, probably a legal claim that looks legitimate enough to cause problems. He can't just take you. This isn't the Dark Ages." "No, but he can make life impossible. He can tell the bank I'm a thief, can tell the town I'm running from legal obligations, can make it so no one will work with us, no one will trust us." Her voice had gone quiet, not with resignation but with calculation. "He doesn't have to take me by force. He just has to make staying here untenable." Caleb considered this. She was right. Reputation was everything out here. One well-placed rumor could destroy what they'd spent 2 months building. "So we get ahead of it," he said. "We tell people first. Control the story before he does." "Tell them what? That I stole from my employer? That won't exactly endear us." "You tell them the truth, that you worked for a family, that the son made unwanted advances, and that you left to protect yourself. Take the parts about the money, if you even want to mention it, and frame it as wages owed. People won't believe that." "Some won't," Caleb admitted, "but some will, especially the women. And the ones who do believe it will spread that version before Davison can spread his." Eliza was quiet for a long moment, thinking it through. "It's risky." "Riskier than waiting for him to show up with his version?" "No, you're right." She straightened, some of the fear leaving her expression, replaced by determination. "All right, we go into town tomorrow. We tell the people we've worked with. Start with Mrs. Patterson. She's got the biggest mouth and she likes me. And if Davison's already talking, then we talk louder." They rode into Broken Creek the next morning under a sky that threatened snow but hadn't committed to it yet. The town looked exactly as it always did, weathered buildings hunched against the wind, a handful of people moving between them with purpose. But something felt different now, tighter, like everyone was watching while pretending not to. They found Mrs. Patterson in the saloon, cleaning glasses in preparation for the evening crowd. She looked up when they entered, and her expression confirmed what Caleb had suspected. She'd already heard something. "Morning," she said carefully. "Morning," Eliza replied. "Can we talk?" Mrs. Patterson glanced around the empty saloon, then nodded. "Suppose we can, though I should tell you, there's been talk—" "I know, that's why we're here." Eliza pulled out a chair, sat down like she was settling in for a long conversation. "I want to tell you my side before you hear his." Over the next 20 minutes, Eliza laid it out. Not everything. She kept the details vague, the violence implied rather than explicit, but enough. A job that went bad. A man who wouldn't take no for an answer. A choice between staying and risking worse or running with the clothes on her back and whatever money she could grab. Mrs. Patterson listened without interrupting. When Eliza finished, the older woman was quiet for a moment. "This man who's here now," she said finally. "He the one you ran from?" "Yes." "And he's saying you're a thief?" "That's what I expect he'll say, yes." Mrs. Patterson made a noise in her throat, something between disgust and understanding. "My first husband was like that. Made me feel like I was crazy for wanting to leave. Then told everyone in our town I was unstable. Took me 2 years and moving 3 states away to get clear of him. Then you understand." "I do." Mrs. Patterson stood, started wiping down the bar with more force than necessary. "And I can tell you right now, any woman with sense will believe your version over his. Men like that, they have a type. We can spot them. But the men in town, some will believe him, sure. Some already do. Morrison's been making noises about how you always seemed suspicious. But Morrison's an ass, and most people know it." She paused in her cleaning, met Eliza's eyes. "You've helped people here, saved livestock, solved problems. That counts for something. Maybe not everything, but something." They left the saloon with one ally secured and spent the rest of the morning making similar rounds. The Chens, who believed them immediately. The Millers, who were skeptical but willing to reserve judgment. Old Man Thompson, who said flatly that he didn't care about anyone's personal drama as long as his sheep stayed healthy. By noon, they'd talked to everyone they'd done business with. The reactions ranged from supportive to neutral to hostile. But at least now there were two versions of the story circulating instead of just one. They were heading back to the wagon when a voice called out behind them. "Miss Warren, Mr. Ryder, might I have a word?" Caleb turned. The man approaching was maybe 40, dressed in clothes that were too fine for Broken Creek. Tailored coat, polished boots, a gold watch chain visible across his vest. He moved with the easy confidence of someone who'd never had to wonder where his next meal was coming from. Marcus Davison. Had to be. "You can have several words," Caleb said, positioning himself slightly in front of Eliza. "Starting with what you want." Davison stopped a polite distance away, smiled like they were all old friends. "I want to resolve an unfortunate misunderstanding. I believe you're harboring an employee of mine who left under difficult circumstances." "I'm not harboring anyone. Miss Warren is my business partner." "Ah, yes. The consulting venture. I've heard about that. Very enterprising." Davison's eyes shifted to Eliza. "But I'm afraid there are some legal matters that need to be addressed before you can continue operating so freely, Miss Warren. Matters regarding property that went missing when you left my family's employment." "You mean the wages you refused to pay me?" Eliza said, her voice steady despite the tension radiating through her. "The ones I had to collect myself because your family felt room and board covered a year's worth of skilled nursing care." "That's one interpretation. The courts might see it differently." "What courts?" Caleb cut in. "Last I checked, you haven't filed any charges. Haven't contacted any sheriff. You've just shown up asking questions and making implications." Davison's smile never wavered. "Because I'm trying to be reasonable. Miss Warren made a mistake. She panicked, took something that wasn't hers, and ran. I'm willing to forget the whole thing if she simply returns what was taken and comes back to fulfill her employment contract." "I fulfilled my contract the day your mother died," Eliza said. "My employment ended then. What happened after was your attempt to extend it under very different terms." "Again, that's your interpretation." "It's the truth." Davison's expression finally shifted, the pleasant mask slipping just enough to show something harder underneath. "The truth is, whatever can be proven in court. And I have documentation, witnesses, financial records showing a pattern of theft. What do you have?" "She has me," Caleb said, "and a business, and roots in this community, which means you can't just waltz in here and take her without causing a scene that'll follow you back to Denver." "Is that a threat, Mr. Ryder?" "It's a reality check. Whatever leverage you think you have, it doesn't extend this far. You want to file charges? Go ahead. Get the sheriff involved. Make it official. But then you'll have to prove your case, and from what I understand, your proof is mostly your word against hers." Davison studied Caleb for a long moment, reassessing. "You're more invested in this than I expected. I wonder why that is." "Partners look out for each other." "Do they?" Davison's gaze moved between them, calculating. "Well, I can see this won't be resolved with a simple conversation. Fortunately, I'm a patient man." He tipped his hat, the gesture somehow mocking. "I'll be in town for a while. Should you change your mind about resolving this reasonably, Miss Warren, you know where to find me." He walked away, back straight, radiating unshakable confidence. Caleb watched him go, his jaw tight. "That went well," Eliza said dryly. "He's not going to stop." "No, he isn't." She turned toward the wagon. "But at least now we know what we're dealing with." The next week was tense. Davison remained in Broken Creek, a constant presence that he made sure they felt even when they didn't see him. He ate at the saloon, chatted with townspeople, presented himself as a reasonable man dealing with an unreasonable situation. And it was working, at least with some people. Morrison became openly hostile, refusing to sell them supplies unless they paid in advance. Two families who'd scheduled consultations canceled. The town started dividing into factions, those who believed Eliza and those who saw an opportunity in Davison's obvious wealth and influence. Through it all, Caleb and Eliza kept working. They couldn't afford to stop, couldn't afford to let the ranch slip back into failure just because everything else was falling apart. So they maintained the morning routine, did the consultations with people who still wanted them, and tried to pretend that the whole situation wasn't a noose slowly tightening. The breaking point came on a Friday afternoon, 9 days after Davison's arrival. Caleb was in town picking up feed from a supplier 2 towns over, since Morrison had made it clear his business wasn't welcome, when he saw smoke on the horizon. Wrong direction for a controlled burn, wrong time of day, wrong color. His ranch was burning. He drove the wagon back at dangerous speed, the horse protesting every mile but responding to his urgency. By the time he crested the final hill and saw his property, the barn was fully engulfed. Flames climbed into the afternoon sky, black smoke billowing across the pasture where his cattle had scattered in panic. Eliza was there with 3 other people, the Chens and Mrs. Patterson, all of them hauling water from the well in a futile attempt to save something. The barn was lost, that was obvious, but the house stood adjacent, and if the wind shifted wrong, it would catch too. Caleb abandoned the wagon and joined the bucket line, working without thinking, his mind too full of smoke and anger to process anything beyond the immediate need. They worked for 2 hours, until the barn had burned down to smoking timbers and the danger to the house had passed. When it was finally over, Caleb stood looking at the ruins. The barn had held their winter feed stores, their equipment, the small amount of hay they'd managed to salvage. Gone. All of it gone. "How did it start?" he asked, his voice hoarse from smoke. "Don't know," Eliza said. She was covered in soot, her hands blistered from the bucket handles. "I was doing a consultation at the Chen's place. When we got back, it was already burning." "Someone was here," Mrs. Patterson said quietly. "Had to be. That fire started too fast to be natural." Caleb knew she was right. He also knew they'd never prove it. The Chens left after helping them move the cattle to the south pasture, promising to return tomorrow with supplies. Mrs. Patterson stayed longer, helping Eliza tend to minor burns and making sure the house was secure. When she finally left, darkness had fallen, and Caleb and Eliza stood alone in front of their ruined barn. "This was him," Eliza said. "Davison. Trying to force us out." "Can't prove it." "Don't need to. We both know it." Caleb wanted to argue, wanted to say they'd rebuild, that this was just another setback. But looking at the smoking ruins, he felt something inside him crack. "Maybe you should go with him," he said quietly. Eliza turned to stare at him. "What?" "Maybe you should go back to Denver. End this before he burns down the house, too. Before someone gets killed." "You don't mean that." "I don't know what I mean." Caleb sat down on the ground, suddenly too exhausted to stand. "I just know that everything I build keeps getting destroyed. The ranch, the herd, now the barn. And you're caught in the middle of my failure." "This isn't your failure. This is Marcus being what he's always been, a man who can't accept losing something he thinks he owns. And what am I supposed to do about that? I can't fight him. He's got money, influence, people who'll do whatever he pays them to do. So we give up? Let him win? We survive. That's what we've been doing all along. And right now, surviving might mean you leaving." Eliza was quiet for a long moment. When she spoke, her voice was different, harder, angrier than he'd ever heard it. "I ran once, from Philadelphia to a ranch I'd never seen, to a man I'd never met, because staying meant accepting what Marcus wanted to make me. And I'll be damned if I run again just because he decided to follow." She crouched down to Caleb's eye level. "That barn burning? That was him showing his hand. He's desperate, and desperate men make mistakes. Or they make everyone around them pay for their desperation." "Then let him try. But I'm not leaving, Caleb, not unless you physically throw me off this property, and even then, I'll probably just come back." Despite everything, Caleb felt something close to a smile trying to form. "You're impossible." "So I've been told." She stood, offered him a hand up. "Come on. We've got work to do." "What work? The barn's gone." "The barn's gone, but the cattle are alive, and we've got enough money saved to buy materials for a temporary shelter. Won't be pretty, but it'll keep them through what's left of winter. And then what? Then we figure out the next thing. Same as always." They spent the next 3 days building a makeshift shelter in the south pasture. Rough timber walls and a tarp roof that leaked when it rained but was better than nothing. The cattle huddled inside, unhappy but sheltered. The work was brutal. made worse by burned hands and exhaustion that had settled into their bones like an ache that wouldn't fade. But they did it, and on the fourth day something unexpected happened. Robert Chen showed up with his wagon full of hay. "Heard you lost your stores," he said simply. "This'll get you through a few weeks." The millers brought lumber they didn't need. Thompson contributed some old fencing materials. Even families who'd been neutral in the whole Davison situation contributed something: nails, tools, labor. "Word got around about the fire," Mrs. Patterson explained when she arrived with a basket of food. "People don't like the idea of someone burning down a barn. Feels like an attack on all of us." By the end of the week, they had enough materials and donated labor to start building a proper barn. Not immediately, the ground was still too frozen for foundation work, but come spring, they'd have what they needed. Davison left town 2 days later, his mission apparently a failure. But as he rode out, he made sure to stop by the ranch first. "This isn't over," he told Eliza from horseback, his pleasant mask completely gone now. "You think you've won something, but all you've done is delay the inevitable. I'll be back, Miss Warren, and next time I won't be so accommodating." "Next time," Eliza said calmly, "bring the sheriff. Make it official. Otherwise, you're just a bitter man who can't accept rejection." Davison's face flushed with anger. For a moment, Caleb thought he might actually do something stupid. But then the man regained control, smiled coldly, and rode away. They watched him disappear down the road, neither of them celebrating. "He will come back," Eliza said quietly. "I know. And it'll be worse next time. Probably." "You sure you want me to stay?" Caleb turned to look at her. This woman who'd shown up in a storm and turned his failure into something resembling success, who'd just survived an attempted intimidation campaign without flinching, who was covered in soot and exhaustion but still standing. "Yeah," he said, "I'm sure." March came with its usual violence, late storms that dumped snow one day and melted it the next, turning everything to mud. But underneath the chaos, there were signs of change. The days grew longer. The cattle gained weight on the donated hay. The consulting business recovered as people decided that burned barns didn't change the fact that they needed help. One evening, working on plans for the new barn by lamplight, Eliza spoke without looking up from her drawings. "I took money from Marcus's household accounts, more than what he owed me in wages. Not a lot, but enough that if he really wanted to press charges, he probably could." Caleb had suspected as much but hadn't asked. "Why'd you do it?" "Because I knew I'd need capital to start over, and because I was angry. He'd stolen months of my life, made me feel small and powerless. Taking that money was the one thing I could do to hurt him back." "You regret it?" "No, I regret needing to do it. But the actual doing? No." She finally looked up, met his eyes. "Does that change things? Knowing I actually did something wrong?" Caleb thought about it, about morality and survival, about the difference between what was legal and what was right, about how much he'd changed in 3 months, from a man ready to give up to someone willing to fight for something that still might fail. "No," he said, "it doesn't change things." Eliza nodded slowly, something releasing in her expression. "Good, because I'm tired of carrying it alone." "Well," Caleb said, returning to his drawings, "now you've got someone to carry it with, for whatever that's worth." "It's worth something," Eliza said quietly, "more than you know." Outside, the wind howled its familiar song, but inside the house it felt different now. Warmer, somehow. Like they'd built something here that had nothing to do with buildings or cattle or success, something that might actually last. Or might not. The frontier didn't make promises. But for tonight, in the lamplight, with plans spread between them and the worst of winter finally behind them, it was enough. Spring arrived the way it always did in Wyoming, reluctantly, violently, and with no regard for human optimism. The snowmelt turned the roads into rivers of mud that could swallow a wagon wheel whole, and the temperature swung 30 degrees in either direction without warning. But underneath all that chaos, the land was waking up. Caleb felt it in his bones before he saw it with his eyes. The cattle moved differently, heads up, sniffing for the first shoots of grass pushing through dead vegetation. The dawn chorus of birds returned, tentative at first, then insistent. Even the wind changed, losing its winter edge, carrying smells of wet earth instead of just cold. They broke ground on the new barn the first week of April, when the frost had finally retreated far enough to allow foundation work. It wasn't the elaborate structure Caleb had once imagined, no fancy stalls or modern conveniences, just solid timber framing and a design that prioritized function over appearance. They did most of the work themselves, trading labor with neighbors who needed consultations, calling in favors from people they'd helped over the winter. Robert Chen spent 3 days helping with the framing. "You saved my herd," he said when Caleb tried to pay him. "This doesn't even come close to square." The work was hard but satisfying in a way the winter consultations hadn't been. There was something about building with your hands, seeing walls rise from nothing, that felt more real than anything else Caleb had done since coming west. This wasn't saving a failing enterprise. This was creating something new from the ashes of what had burned. Eliza worked alongside them when she wasn't dealing with livestock calls, which had increased now that word had spread beyond Broken Creek. She'd developed a reputation that extended 30 miles in every direction, and families were willing to ride a full day just to get her assessment of their animals. "We should formalize this," she said one evening, tallying the week's income. "Set up a proper schedule, maybe designate certain days for consultations so people know when to find us." "You mean like a real business?" "We are a real business. We're just running it like amateurs." She pushed the ledger across the table so he could see. "Look at these numbers. We made more in the last month than you made all of last year from cattle sales." Caleb studied the figures. She was right. The consulting income had surpassed what he'd considered his primary revenue stream. "So what are you suggesting?" "I'm suggesting we stop thinking of this as a side venture and start treating it as what it actually is, our main operation. The ranch supports the consulting work, not the other way around." It was a fundamental shift in perspective, and it took Caleb a moment to wrap his mind around it. He'd come west to be a rancher. That had been the plan, the identity he'd built for himself. Admitting that the plan had changed felt like admitting failure. "I can see you thinking yourself in circles," Eliza said. "Stop it. There's no shame in adapting to what works." "Isn't there? I set out to build a cattle operation. Now you're saying I should accept that I'm better at telling other people how to run theirs." "I'm saying you're good at solving problems. Whether those problems are on your land or someone else's doesn't matter. Results matter. Income matters. Survival matters." She was right, but that didn't make it easier to accept. Caleb had spent so long defining success in one specific way that redefining it felt like giving up, even when the new definition was clearly working better. "Fine," he said eventually. "We formalize it. Set up a schedule. Maybe print actual advertisements instead of handwritten notices. But we don't abandon the cattle. I'm not ready to do that. I'm not asking you to. I'm asking you to be strategic about what gets our focus." Eliza pulled the ledger back, made some notes. "We keep a small breeding herd, 20 head, maybe 30 once we've rebuilt. Quality over quantity. And we use them as living demonstrations for our consulting work." "Demonstrations?" "People trust what they can see. If our cattle are healthy and thriving, it proves our methods work. We become a working example, not just advisors." The logic was sound, even if it required Caleb to accept a vision of the ranch that bore no resemblance to what he'd originally imagined. But maybe that was the point. Maybe survival meant letting go of the picture in your head and dealing with what actually existed. The new barn was finished by late April, a solid structure that smelled of fresh-cut pine and honest labor. They held an informal gathering to mark its completion. Nothing fancy, just neighbors who'd helped, sharing food and coffee while admiring the work. It felt good, this small community they'd built without meaning to, this network of people who'd gone from mockery to grudging respect to something approaching friendship. Augustus Blake showed up late in the afternoon, his presence commanding immediate attention the way wealth always did. He walked through the barn with a critical eye, checking corners and joints, testing the structural integrity with the confidence of someone who knew buildings. "Good work," he said finally. "Better than what burned, I'd wager." "Different," Caleb said. "More practical." "Practical is good. Practical lasts." Blake accepted a cup of coffee from Eliza, nodded his thanks. "I've been hearing interesting things about your operation. People are talking. People always talk." "True. But this talk is different. They're saying you've become the person to see about livestock problems, that you've solved issues that stumped everyone else." "Eliza's done most of that," Caleb said. "And you've done the rest, Don't sell yourself short, Ryder. Blake sipped his coffee, watching the gathered neighbors with assessment in his eyes. I have a proposition for you both. Caleb exchanged glances with Eliza. Propositions from wealthy men rarely ended well. I'm listening, he said carefully. I need someone to manage my breeding program. Full-time, proper salary, housing on my property. You'd be responsible for maintaining my herd genetics, handling all the veterinary work, consulting on feed and management practices. It was a generous offer. More than generous. It was security, stability, everything Caleb had been chasing since he arrived in Wyoming. He could see Eliza processing it too, running calculations behind her eyes. That's very flattering, Eliza said, but we have our own operation here. Do you? Or do you have a struggling ranch that you're trying to keep afloat with consulting work? Blake's tone wasn't cruel, just realistic. I'm offering you a way to focus on what you're actually good at without the constant pressure of keeping this place from failing. And what happens to the ranch? Caleb asked. Sell it, or lease it out, or let it sit empty, doesn't matter. The point is, you'd be free of the burden. Free of the burden. The phrase echoed in Caleb's head. A year ago, even a month ago, he might have taken that offer without hesitation. But standing in the barn they'd just built, surrounded by people who'd helped them survive, the idea of abandoning it felt wrong. I appreciate the offer, Caleb said slowly, but I think we'll stick with what we've built here. Blake raised an eyebrow. You're turning down guaranteed income and stability to keep struggling on marginal land? I'm turning down someone else's vision to keep building my own. Blake studied him for a moment, then smiled, not mocking, but approving. Fair enough. Offer stands if you change your mind, but something tells me you won't. After Blake left, after the other neighbors had drifted away, and evening had settled over the ranch, Eliza found Caleb in the barn, checking on the cattle one final time before bed. You didn't even discuss it with me, she said. Blake's offer. Didn't think I needed to. We're partners. Partners don't make unilateral decisions about their operation. Even when the decision might be smarter? More practical? Is that what you think? That we should have taken it? Eliza leaned against a stall post, considering. Part of me thinks yes. The practical part that knows how fragile this all is, how quickly it could collapse again. But there's another part, a bigger part, that's glad you said no. Why? Because what we've built here is ours. Not his, not the bank's, not anyone else's. Ours. And that's worth more than security. Caleb wanted to believe her, but the weight of responsibility sat heavy on his shoulders, heavier now that they'd put so much work into rebuilding. They had employees depending on them, not formal ones, but people who relied on their consultations. They had a barn full of materials bought on credit. They had another bank payment coming due in 8 months. What if I can't keep it together? He asked quietly. What if everything we've built falls apart anyway? Then we'll build it again, or build something else. That's what we do, Caleb. We adapt. The next challenge came not from fire or debt, but from nature itself, delivered in the form of a freak late-season blizzard that hit the second week of May. The storm caught everyone off guard. Temperatures had been climbing towards summer, lambs and calves had been born, assuming warm weather ahead, and then the sky opened up with snow and wind that belonged to January. Caleb woke to whiteness pressing against the windows and wind that made the new barn timbers creak. He dressed fast, knowing before he even got outside that this would be bad. The cattle had sense enough to shelter in the new barn, but out in the valley, neighbors with less adequate structures would be scrambling. And the newborn animals, calves and lambs and foals, had almost no chance if they weren't brought inside immediately. We need to check on people, Eliza said, already pulling on her coat. The Chens don't have covered shelters. Neither do the Pattersons. In this weather, we'll get lost between here and the road. Then we tie a rope from the house to the barn, barn to the fence line to the road. We've got enough rope. They did have enough rope, barely. They spent the next hour in wind that tried to knock them over, stringing a safety line that would let them navigate back if visibility dropped to nothing. Then they took the wagon, now fitted with makeshift runners for snow travel, and started making rounds. The Chens were struggling when they arrived, trying to move newborn calves into a lean-to that was already collapsing under snow weight. Caleb and Robert worked to shore up the structure while Eliza and Robert's wife moved the animals to safety. 2 calves were already dead, frozen where they'd been born just hours before. "We're going to lose them all," Robert said, his voice hollow with exhaustion. "Not if we move fast," Caleb told him. "You've got that old root cellar, right? The one you don't use?" "It's full of junk. Clear it out. It'll be warmer than any structure above ground, and it's protected from wind. Move everything that can fit down there." They spent 3 hours making it work, hauling animals down narrow stairs into a cellar that smelled of earth and potatoes, crowding them together for warmth. It wasn't elegant, but by the time they finished, 15 calves were huddled in relative safety. "I'll pay you for this," Robert said as they were leaving. "Whatever you want." "Keep your money," Caleb interrupted. "Just pay it forward next time someone needs help." They hit 4 more properties that day, helping move animals, shore up structures, checking on families who might be stranded. By the time they made it home after dark, Caleb could barely feel his hands, and Eliza was coughing from breathing too much cold air too fast. They collapsed by the fire, not bothering with food, just trying to get warm. Outside, the storm raged on. "We should have died today," Caleb said. "A dozen times we should have gotten lost or frozen. But we didn't. This time. What about next time?" Eliza turned to look at him, her face exhausted but determined. "Then we'll survive next time too. Or we won't, but we don't get to stop trying just because it's hard." The storm lasted 3 days. When it finally broke, the landscape was transformed. Everything buried under 2 feet of unexpected snow, fences obliterated, roads impassable. The death toll among livestock was devastating. Across the territory, ranchers lost animals by the hundreds. But not on the properties where Caleb and Eliza had intervened. The Chens lost 2 calves instead of 15. The Pattersons lost none. The Millers' lambs survived. Word spread faster than the snowmelt about who'd ridden out in the worst of the storm to help, who'd known what to do, who'd saved animals that everyone else had given up for dead. The week after the storm, they had more consultation requests than they could handle. Some came from as far as 50 miles away, people willing to travel because they'd heard about the pair who'd somehow beaten impossible odds. "We need help," Eliza said, looking at the list of appointments. "We can't do all of this alone. Help costs money. Help makes money. If we hire someone to handle the routine consultations, we can focus on the complex cases that pay more." It made sense, but it meant expanding, taking on more risk, betting that their reputation would hold. Caleb's instinct was to stay small, stay safe, but small and safe had nearly starved him before Eliza arrived. "All right," he said. "We hire someone, but we do it carefully. Someone who knows livestock, who won't undermine what we've built." They found their person in a surprising place. Mary Thompson, Old Man Thompson's granddaughter, showed up at their door 3 days later with a proposition of her own. "I've been helping my grandfather with his sheep since I was 6, she said without preamble. "I know livestock as well as most men around here, better than some, and I've been watching what you 2 do. I can learn it." "We don't have much to pay," Eliza warned. "I don't need much, just enough to eventually buy my own place. And the training, that's worth more than wages anyway." They hired her on a trial basis, and within a week it was clear they'd made the right choice. Mary was quick, observant, and had a natural rapport with animals that couldn't be taught. She handled the routine calls with confidence, freeing Caleb and Eliza to deal with the harder problems. By late June, their operation had evolved into something neither of them had planned, but both recognized as sustainable. The ranch, now officially renamed Warren Ryder Consulting Ranch, though most people just called it the Warren Place, ran like a small business. Mary handled basic consultations. Eliza took the complex livestock cases. Caleb focused on land management and infrastructure problems. The cattle herd had grown back to 22 head, healthy and thriving, proof of concept for their methods. They weren't wealthy, but they were stable. They weren't famous, but they were respected. It was enough. Or it would have been, except that in early July, a rider arrived from the territorial capital with news that changed everything. "There's to be an agricultural exposition in Cheyenne," the man explained, handing Caleb an official-looking letter. "Territory's trying to attract more settlers, more investment. They want to showcase successful operations, prove that Wyoming can be more than cattle barons and mining companies. And, Caleb asked, scanning the letter, and your names came up. Governor's office wants you there, demonstrating your consulting methods, maybe giving some talks about livestock management and land adaptation. We're not showmen, Eliza said. Don't have to be. Just have to be good at what you do, which, according to every report I've heard, you are. The writer tipped his hat. It's next month. 2 weeks in Cheyenne, all expenses paid, and a chance to meet people who might want to invest in Wyoming enterprises. After he left, Caleb and Eliza stood looking at the letter, like it might bite them. This is exposure, Eliza said carefully. The kind that Marcus would hear about, probably. Which means going to Cheyenne would be painting a target on our backs. Yes. But it's also opportunity. Real opportunity, not just scraping by. Caleb knew she was right. An exposition like this could transform their business, bring in clients from across the territory, maybe even attract the kind of investment that would let them expand without drowning in debt. What do you want to do? He asked. Eliza was quiet for a long time, staring out at the land they'd fought so hard to keep. When she finally spoke, her voice was steady. I'm tired of hiding, tired of looking over my shoulder, tired of making decisions based on what might keep Marcus away instead of what might make us thrive. She turned to face Caleb. So we go to Cheyenne. We do the exposition. We show everyone what we've built. And if Marcus shows up because of it, then we deal with that when it happens. You're sure? No. But I'm done letting fear run my life. They spent the next 3 weeks preparing. Mary agreed to watch the ranch while they were gone, and they arranged for neighbors to check in regularly. They developed presentations, practiced demonstrations, tried to figure out how to compress everything they knew into something that could be taught in a 2-hour session. The night before they left, Caleb found himself unable to sleep. He stood outside under a sky full of stars, looking at the ranch that had gone from his personal disaster to something approaching success. 8 months ago, he'd been ready to walk away from all of it. Now he was preparing to showcase it to the territory. Can't sleep either? Eliza joined him, wrapping a shawl around her shoulders against the cool night air. Just thinking about how much has changed. You mean how much we've changed it? Is there a difference? Maybe not. She stood beside him, not touching, but present. You know, when I showed up here on Christmas Eve, I was just running. I didn't have a plan beyond getting far enough away that Marcus couldn't easily follow. This ranch was supposed to be a temporary hideout, nothing more. And now? Now it's home, which is terrifying in its own way. Caleb understood that. Home meant something to lose, something that could be taken. It was easier to survive when you had nothing worth protecting. We could still back out, he said. Tell the governor we're not interested. Stay here, keep things small and quiet. We could, Eliza agreed, but we won't. No, Caleb said, feeling something settle in his chest. Not quite confidence, but maybe its quieter cousin, determination. We won't. They left for Cheyenne the next morning, the wagon loaded with supplies and demonstration materials, neither of them quite sure what they were heading toward, but both committed to facing it together. Whatever came next, success or disaster, exposure or opportunity, they'd built something that could withstand it. A ranch that had survived fire and storms and debt and threats. A partnership that had evolved from desperation into something neither of them knew how to name, but both recognized as essential. The road stretched ahead, leading toward a city and an exposition and possibilities they couldn't predict. Behind them, the ranch sat quiet in the morning light, waiting for their return. Cheyenne sprawled across the plains like something that had been dropped there by accident and decided to stay. Buildings of brick and wood competed for attention along streets that were half dirt, half boardwalk, as if the city couldn't quite decide whether it was permanent or temporary. People moved with purpose between establishments that promised everything from fine dining to frontier justice, and the whole place hummed with an energy that made Caleb's teeth ache. They'd been on the road for 3 days, sleeping under the wagon at night, arriving in the territorial capital just as the sun was setting on their 4th evening. The exposition grounds occupied a large field on the western edge of town, marked by partially constructed pavilions and piles of lumber waiting to become displays. It's bigger than I expected, Eliza said, taking in the scope of the operation. Everything here is bigger than expected, Caleb replied, guiding the wagon toward a cluster of tents where other exhibitors were making camp. Question is whether that's good or bad. They found their assigned space, a plot near the livestock demonstration area, already marked with a sign that read, Warren Ryder Ranch Consultation, Land Management and Livestock Health. Someone had gotten the name slightly wrong, but Caleb decided not to care about details that didn't matter. Setting up took most of the next day. They erected a simple canopy for shade, arranged their demonstration materials, and tried to make everything look more professional than it actually was. Other exhibitors were doing the same, ranchers showing off prize bulls, agricultural equipment salesmen hawking new plows, a group from the university with charts about soil composition that made Caleb's head hurt. "We don't belong here," he muttered, watching a man in an expensive suit explain irrigation techniques to a gathered crowd. "These people are experts. We're just what?" Liza interrupted. "Just the people who saved half the ranches in 3 counties? Just the operation that survived 2 winters that killed everyone else? Stop selling us short." She was right, but confidence didn't come naturally to Caleb. He'd spent too long failing to suddenly believe he deserved to be showcased. The exposition opened the next morning with speeches from the territorial governor and various officials who talked about Wyoming's bright future in terms that sounded rehearsed and optimistic in equal measure. Caleb stood at the back of the crowd, half listening, scanning faces for any sign of Marcus Davison. He didn't see him, but that didn't mean the man wasn't there. Their first presentation was scheduled for early afternoon, a demonstration of diagnostic techniques for common livestock ailments. Eliza had prepared carefully, bringing detailed notes and a borrowed goat that was cooperating better than expected. A crowd of maybe 30 people gathered, mostly ranchers and a few curious townspeople. Eliza worked through her demonstration with calm precision, explaining how to identify respiratory issues, digestive problems, and parasitic infections by observation alone. She showed them what healthy gums looked like versus inflamed ones, how to read an animal's stance and movement for signs of lameness, the difference between a cough that meant nothing and one that meant pneumonia. Caleb watched from the side, simultaneously proud and terrified. This was Eliza fully in her element, confident and knowledgeable, the kind of expert people paid attention to. The crowd asked good questions, which she answered without hesitation. By the time she finished, several people were taking notes, and at least 5 had asked about scheduling consultations. "That wasn't so bad," she said afterward, releasing the goat back to its owner. "You were amazing. I was adequate. There's a difference." But she smiled, pleased despite herself. Caleb's own presentation came the next day, land management strategies for marginal properties. He'd been dreading it, certain he'd freeze up or say something stupid. But once he started talking about water catchment and erosion control and how to read land for its actual potential rather than what you wanted it to be, the words came easier than expected. He talked about failure honestly, about buying land that everyone said was worthless and nearly proving them right, about learning through mistakes that cost him money he didn't have, about the moment when stopping trying to force the land to be something it wasn't and starting to work with what it actually offered made all the difference. The crowd was smaller than Eliza's had been, maybe 20 people, but they listened with intensity. When he finished, a woman in her 50s approached with tears in her eyes. "My husband and I bought land south of here 2 years ago," she said. "We've been failing the same way you described. Everything you said, I felt like you were telling our story." "Did the presentation help?" Caleb asked. "It helped me understand we're not stupid. We're just trying to grow corn where we should be grazing cattle. That's not failure, it's just wrong strategy." 3 more people came up with similar stories. A young couple who'd mortgaged everything for a homestead that was slowly breaking them. An older man who'd lost his first ranch and was terrified of losing the second. People who saw their own struggles reflected in Caleb's honesty and found something like hope in knowing someone else had survived the same thing. By the end of the first week, they'd given 5 presentations each, consulted with dozens of ranchers, and built a reputation that extended well beyond their small corner of the exhibition grounds. People started referring others to them. "You need to talk to the Warren Ryder folks. They actually know what they're doing." Augustus Blake showed up on day 6, accompanied by 2 other wealthy ranchers Caleb didn't recognize. I told them they needed to see your operation, Blake said without preamble. They didn't believe me when I described what you've built. The two men, introduced as Hartwell and DeSoto, listened to Eliza's next presentation with skeptical expressions that gradually shifted to interest. Afterward, they cornered Caleb and Eliza with a proposition that sounded too good to be legitimate. We're forming a consortium, Hartwell explained, pooling resources to improve livestock management across our combined operations. We need someone to oversee the health and breeding programs. Based on what we've seen here, you two would be ideal. We have our own operation, Caleb said carefully, which you could continue running. This would be additional work, contracted through the consortium. We're talking significant compensation, enough that you could expand your ranch, hire more staff, maybe even buy up some of that worthless land around you and prove it's not so worthless after all. The offer was staggering, life-changing money for work they were already doing, just on a larger scale. Caleb looked at Eliza, trying to read her reaction. We'd need to discuss it, she said diplomatically. This is a big decision. Of course. We're not asking for an answer today. DeSoto handed them a card with an address in Denver. Think it over. Contact us when you've decided. After they left, Caleb and Eliza stood in silence, processing. That's what success looks like, Eliza finally said. Not just surviving, but thriving, building something that matters beyond our little corner of nowhere. You want to take it. I want to consider it seriously, don't you? Caleb did, but something about it felt wrong. Maybe it was too much, too fast. Maybe he was just suspicious of good fortune after so many months of fighting for every small victory. Or maybe he was afraid that accepting would mean fundamentally changing what they'd built into something unrecognizable. Let's get through the rest of the exposition first, he said. Then we'll talk about it properly. The conversation was tabled, but Caleb could feel it hanging between them. This question of what they wanted versus what they should want, what was smart versus what felt right. Marcus Davison appeared on day 9. Caleb was giving a presentation on fence construction for frozen ground when he spotted him at the back of the crowd. The same expensive clothes, the same confident stance, but something had changed in his expression. He looked older, harder, like the months since his last visit had cost him something. Caleb stumbled over his words, lost his place, had to restart his explanation of post-hole depth. Half the crowd probably thought he was incompetent. The other half was too polite to show it. When the presentation ended, Davison didn't approach. He just stood there, watching, until Caleb couldn't take it anymore and walked over. You here to cause trouble? Caleb asked bluntly. Would you believe me if I said no? Probably not. Davison's mouth twitched in something that wasn't quite a smile. Fair enough. I've earned that mistrust. He gestured toward the exhibition grounds. Impressive operation you've built. I've been asking around. People speak highly of you both. That's what happens when you actually help people instead of trying to intimidate them. Is that what you think I was doing? Intimidating? What would you call burning down my barn? I didn't burn down your barn, Mr. Ryder, though I understand why you'd think I did. Davison met his eyes directly. I was angry when I left Broken Creek, angry enough to want to hurt you both for defying me. But I'm not stupid enough to commit arson. Too many legal complications. Then who did? My guess? Morrison. He's got a grudge against anyone who makes him look bad, and your success did exactly that. But that's speculation. Caleb studied the man, trying to figure out if this was some new strategy or actual honesty. What do you want, Davison? To talk to Miss Warren. Briefly, with you present, if that makes her more comfortable. I'm leaving Wyoming tomorrow, and I'd like to resolve this before I go. Resolve what? There's nothing to resolve. She's not going back with you. I know that. Davison's voice was tired. I've known that for months. I just need to hear it from her, and I need to say something I should have said a long time ago. Caleb wanted to refuse, to tell him to leave and never come back, but something in Davison's demeanor suggested this wasn't an ambush, and Eliza deserved the chance to face him on her own terms. Wait here, Caleb said. I'll ask her. He found Eliza at their display organizing materials for the next day. When he explained, her face went very still. He wants to apologize, she said, disbelief clear in her voice. That's what he said. Could be a trap. Or it could be genuine. She set down the paper she'd been holding. Either way, I want to hear it. I want to see his face when he admits what he did. They found Davison where Caleb had left him, standing awkwardly among the dispersing crowd like he didn't quite know what to do with himself. "Miss Warren," he said when he saw her, "thank you for agreeing to speak with me." "Make it quick," Eliza said. "I have another presentation in an hour." "I'll be brief." Davison took a breath, and for the first time since Caleb had known of his existence, the man looked uncertain. "What I did to you was wrong. The advances, the refusal to accept your rejection, the pursuit after you left. All of it was wrong. And I owe you an apology that's about 6 months overdue." "That's it?" Eliza's voice was sharp. "You tracked me across 2 states, tried to intimidate me into coming back, possibly burned down our barn, and now you want to apologize and call it even?" "No, nothing makes it even. I'm not asking for forgiveness. I don't deserve it. I'm just trying to take responsibility for the harm I caused." He pulled an envelope from his coat. "This is the money you took when you left, plus the wages we actually owed you. It's not compensation for what you went through, but it's what I can offer." Eliza took the envelope, opened it, stared at the bills inside. Her hands were shaking slightly. "Why now?" she asked. "Why come all the way here to do this?" "Because I've spent months being angry at you for leaving, at Ryder for protecting you, at everyone except the person who actually caused the problem, which was me." Davison looked away, toward the mountains visible in the distance. "My mother died thinking I was a good man. She never knew what I'd become. And watching you build something real here, something honest, it made me realize how far I'd fallen from who I was supposed to be." The silence stretched out. Caleb watched Eliza's face, trying to read what she was thinking, ready to intervene if she needed him to. "I don't forgive you," she said finally, "and I don't want your guilt or your redemption story. What you did can't be fixed with money and an apology." "I know. But I'll take the money, because we earned it. And I'll accept that you're trying to be better, because that's more than most men in your position would do." Davison nodded slowly. "That's more than fair." He tipped his hat to them both. "I wish you success with your operation. For what it's worth, I think you've built something remarkable." He walked away, disappearing into the crowd of exposition attendees. Caleb and Eliza stood watching him go, neither quite sure what had just happened. "Do you believe him?" Caleb asked. "I don't know. Maybe." Eliza looked down at the envelope in her hands. "But it doesn't matter if I believe him. What matters is that he's leaving, and I don't have to be afraid anymore." "How much is in there?" She counted quickly. $240, plus what he claimed as wages. She looked up at Caleb, and there were tears in her eyes. "We can expand the ranch, buy more cattle, build a proper consultation office, maybe even purchase the adjacent property. Or we can take the consortium offer and have both." "Or we can do that," she agreed. "We have options now, real ones." The final week of the exposition passed in a blur of presentations, consultations, and conversations with people who wanted to learn or hire or invest. The consortium offer remained on the table, and Caleb found himself thinking about it constantly. It represented everything he'd wanted when he first came west: security, respect, the ability to build something lasting. But it also represented compromise. Working for others, even as a consultant, answering to people with more money and more land, becoming successful in a way that was defined by someone else's standards. On the last night of the exposition, after all the crowds had gone and the other exhibitors were packing up, Caleb and Eliza sat by their wagon, sharing a bottle of whiskey someone had given them as thanks for advice that had saved their operation. "We should talk about the consortium," Eliza said. "I know. You don't want to take it." "No," Caleb admitted. "I don't." "Why not? It's good money, good connections, good for our reputation." "Because it feels like giving up what we've built to become employees again. Better paid employees, sure, but still answering to someone else." Eliza was quiet for a moment, sipping her whiskey. "I think you're right," she said finally. "We came here to showcase what we've built, and what we've built works because it's ours. The moment we start answering to a consortium, even as contractors, it stops being ours." "So we turn them down?" "We counter-offer. We tell them we'll consult on specific projects, at our rates, on our schedule, but we don't become their employees. We remain independent operators who they can hire when they need expertise. They might not go for that. Then we walk away and keep building what we've got, which is already more than either of us had 8 months ago. Caleb thought about the ranch, their ranch now, in every way that mattered. Thought about the barn they'd built together, the cattle that had survived because of their work, the network of ranchers who trusted them. Thought about how far they'd come from that Christmas Eve when a half-frozen woman had knocked on his door and refused to leave. "All right," he said, "we counteroffer. And if they don't like it, we go home and keep doing what we've been doing." "Partners?" Eliza asked, holding out her hand. "Partners," Caleb confirmed, shaking it. They returned to Broken Creek 3 weeks after they'd left, the wagon loaded with new equipment purchased with Davison's money, a list of clients who wanted consultations, and a contract with the consortium that gave them everything they'd wanted on their own terms. Not employees, but independent contractors who could pick and choose their projects. Mary met them at the ranch with a report that everything had gone smoothly in their absence, though she admitted to being relieved they were back. "Got awful quiet here on my own," she said. "And the cattle missed you. Swear they did." The ranch looked the same but felt different. Or maybe Caleb felt different. He'd left as someone still proving himself, still fighting to justify his existence. He returned as someone who'd been recognized, validated, seen as an expert worth listening to. It should have felt like an ending. Instead, it felt like a beginning. August brought another early storm, but this time they were ready. The new barn held strong, the cattle were healthy, and they'd prepared enough feed to weather anything short of apocalypse. When other ranchers struggled, Caleb and Eliza helped, not just for money, though they charged fair rates, but because that's what neighbors did. The consulting business continued to grow. They hired 2 more assistants, young ranchers who wanted to learn. They bought the adjacent property, 200 acres that everyone said was worthless, and started proving otherwise. One evening in late September, sitting on the porch as the sun set over land that had tried to kill him a year ago, Caleb realized something had shifted. He wasn't thinking about survival anymore. He was thinking about the future, about expansion, about teaching, about building something that would outlast him. "You're smiling," Eliza said, joining him on the porch steps. "That's new." "Just thinking about how much has changed." "Most of it for the better, I'd say." "Most of it because of you," Caleb corrected. "I'd have given up if you hadn't shown up." "Maybe. Or maybe you'd have figured it out eventually." She leaned back against the porch post, looking content in a way he'd never seen her look before. "Either way, we're here now. That's what matters." "Are you happy?" Caleb asked. Actually happy, not just satisfied or comfortable or any of those other words people use when they're afraid to claim happiness. Eliza considered the question seriously. "Yes," she said finally. "I think I am. For the first time in years, I'm not running from anything or toward anything. I'm just here, doing work I'm good at, with someone I trust. That's happiness, isn't it?" "I think so," Caleb said, "though I'm not sure I have much experience with it to compare." "Neither do I. Guess we'll figure it out together." They sat in comfortable silence as darkness settled over the ranch. In the barn, the cattle were bedded down for the night. In the house, Mary was preparing dinner. She'd moved into the small addition they'd built, becoming less an employee and more a part of their operation. Somewhere in the distance, a coyote called, and another answered. Winter would come again. There would be storms and struggles, debts and difficulties, all the challenges that made up frontier life. But Caleb found he wasn't afraid of them anymore. They'd survived worse. They'd built something from nothing, turned failure into function, transformed a dying ranch into something people respected. A year ago, Caleb Ryder had been a broken man waiting for permission to quit. Now he was someone different, not perfect, not even entirely confident, but present, engaged, building instead of just surviving. And beside him sat the woman who'd arrived in a storm and refused to let him surrender to his own worst instincts. "We should probably get inside," Eliza said as the temperature dropped. "Mary's going to announce dinner any minute." "In a moment," Caleb said. "Just want to sit here a little longer." "All right," Eliza agreed and stayed beside him as the first stars appeared in the darkening sky. They'd made something here, not just a ranch or a business, but a life. Messy and imperfect and hard-won, built from scraps and stubbornness and the refusal to accept that failure was inevitable. On the frontier, survival belonged not to the strongest or the smartest or the ones with the best plans. It belonged to the ones who kept trying, kept adapting, kept finding reasons to get up when everything said stay down. Caleb and Eliza had proven that. And in proving it, they'd found something neither had been looking for but both desperately needed. A place to belong, a purpose worth fighting for, and a partnership that had started in desperation but had become something solid enough to withstand whatever came next. The ranch, their ranch, Warren Ryder, the place that refused to die, stood quiet in the gathering darkness, ready for another season, another challenge, another chapter in a story that was just beginning.